Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Best of Pedalshift. On this edition, we go all the way back to Christmas Eve 2020, December 24th, 2020, for an episode that I think is really interesting in retrospect. It is about my bicycle touring planning process. Now, it was through the lens of a trip that I really intended to do in 2021, and that was a trip, as you'll discover here, from here, where I'm sitting right now at my cabin, to New York City. Still didn't do that. Have not done that yet for a variety of reasons. But I still think this is really an interesting insight into my bicycle touring process, but also a reminder to me, perhaps, that this is a tour I should consider for 2024. Hope you enjoy. On this edition, we are going to be doing a little bit of bicycle tour wish casting. So I've been thinking, as I have been talking about on the show, about future tours, and I think I have come up with a potential spring, maybe 2021 tour that would scratch more than a few itches that I have not talked about really on the show at all. And it's also a bit of tour planning in lieu of touring. I've talked about this quite a bit, where when you aren't able to tour, and in this case, I'm not going to be touring in the next several weeks/months for, the holidays are here, so I'm going to be spending time with family. The weather is less than awesome. In fact, tomorrow I think we're supposed to get 2 inches of rain, which sounds like I should have done that horrible tour that I had talked about doing, the Sufferfest. Oh, well, missed opportunity, I suppose. But also I wanted to talk about it in this context because I wanted to give you some insight into how I come up with new tours and what my mental process is for all of that. So let me just jump right into it here. How do I start when I'm trying to come up with a new tour? I come up with typically where I want to end up, what my ultimate destination is. And then from there, I figure out where I'm going to be starting after that. I know that, and that's usually in that order. I know that might sound a little strange, but to a certain degree, where I ultimately want to go to sometimes would require me to hop on a plane or hop on a train or do some kind of traveling from where I live or one of the two places that I tend to be living. So where I want to end up is how I start the process. Once I figure that all out, and then I figure where I'm going to be starting from, again, this past year, it's always been from home and ending up at home. Then I want to factor in what the limitations are, and in the past, money has been a limitation. I wasn't making as much money during a certain period of time. So keeping a tour on the cheap is a major factor, a major limiting factor. And other times it's been how much time do I have to be able to? There were times when I didn't have to factor time in so much. I had weeks of possibility, and that's when I was able to do that 2014 ride. A couple of years ago, of course, I did the DC to Cincinnati ride, and I had 2 full weeks, which wasn't a luxurious amount of time, but it was a limiting factor to how I did it. I had to factor in at least one fast forward, and I was limited to just basically 1 0-mile day. So time is a factor, limiting factor in how things go. And of course, this year, COVID, major limiting factor. Those are the types of things that will determine how a tour can go. And then from there, once I factor in my limitations, where I'm going to, where I'm starting from, basically all of those things together, I reverse engineer the whole tour from there. So let's start off with a real simple thing, and that is destination. I have always wanted to find touring on the East Coast in a way that satisfies the same type of riding I do on the West Coast. It has been the thing that I've been wanting to do for the better part of the last decade. And over time, I think I've come to the determination that I really need to rethink that. The infrastructure on the East Coast is completely different than what the infrastructure is on the West Coast. The cities are closer together, particularly in the Northeast, and that kind of limits the ability to do camping in a lot of ways. Not always, but just the whole infrastructure is very, very different. And so that has, I think, been a frustration for me when coming up with an East Coast tour. But my destination, I want to be on the East Coast because who knows, 2021 is probably going to, at least in the early stages, require me to be following some kind of COVID guidelines, at least early 2021 and perhaps later. So I'm going to go with New York City. And the reason why I'm going to go with New York City as my destination is I've been wanting to do this for a very long time. And it is a city that I have great affection for, great affinity for. I went to law school not far from it. Worked for a summer at the U.S. Attorney's Office there. I love me some New York City. And I think that New York is a great beacon for all sorts of different types of travel. And it's just iconic. And you know what? I haven't been able to go there for a while, a really long while. And I kind of miss it. So I think I'd like to go to New York City. That's going to be my destination. So let's go to step 2. Where am I going to be starting from? Well, this may not surprise you so much that I have thought about doing a DC to New York ride. It's a well-trodden path. I know the Climate Ride folks have done it for years. I know that the Adventure Cycling Association has, as part of its Atlantic Coast route, that's a piece of that. But I've been very interested in kind of rolling my own. And when I've tried to do a DC to New York route, I tend to get frustrated. Maybe frustrated is the wrong word. I'm dissatisfied with the way the route looks. And the reason is that it's really tricky to get from DC, well, really out of DC. There's great infrastructure in the district, but then once you get right outside of it, in between DC and Baltimore, things really start to fall apart, and there's very busy roads. They're not great for bicycling. I know that there's a ton of people who are listening who probably ride that stuff all the time, but when I'm looking at it, for whatever reason, it's deeply dissatisfying. I think it goes back to my other frustration that I talked about earlier, where I'm kind of trying to apply the West Coast and its infrastructure on what I have on the East Coast, and it just doesn't exist. And I think I get frustrated. I throw my hands up and say, when's the next flight to Portland? So that's kind of what it's been. So I have a new plan. I'm walking you through what I've already thought about, if that isn't obviously clear right now. By the way, my dog is crazy. This is Mookie, who is the biggest of the dogs. He's also the nuttiest of the dogs. Right now, he is walking around in circles on top of 2 couch pillows to try to jam his body in a weird nest. It's a thing. He's a weird dog. I apologize for the soundscape of that. So, as I was saying, because I'm dissatisfied with the DC to New York, I'm now planning on starting from the cabin in the Eastern Panhandle, West Virginia, seeing if there is a different approach that gets me there. And that's how the planning has been going. So, what do I do once I've got my starting point and my end point? As I've talked about, sometimes I don't end up with anything. Sometimes I end up having serious problems getting to connect those 2 dots. The resources I tend to use, if I know of an existing trail or resource that is off-road that I like, such as the C&O, I make sure that that's part of it. And that's a resource in and of itself, of course, and any websites or apps or planning devices that are around that. Then I'll use things like, and I've talked about this before, Google Maps, Ride with GPS, message boards like Crazy Guy on a Bike, just straight up Googling past research. Sometimes state transportation websites will be helpful. All of those things go into the kitty, and I just sort of, I just follow the breadcrumbs on all of this to try to assemble things together. And I'll tend to use a note app like Evernote, or Apple has the Notes app that works between the computers and the phones. I'll use something like that. Evernote tends to be the one that I like to use because that's where I have thrown literally everything over the years. I have notebooks, electronic notebooks, of course, full of maps and ideas and itineraries that were half-baked, and all of that stuff goes in there. And every once in a while, I'll go back and I'll find something, and it will remind me that of past research I've done. And that happened here. And I think I'm really excited to share that as part of it. Sometimes you're going to do research that goes nowhere. Save it anyways, because it might be helpful down the line. And it definitely did for me. So let's walk down the path that I walked down for this. I'm kind of tentatively calling it Escape to New York. Like Escape from New York is the Kurt Russell movie. I think they remade it. Did they? I don't know. In any event, Kurt Russell, Escape from New York, classic. So I'm going to start off with, if I'm going to be at the cabin, the obvious choice for me as the beginning of it is getting down, getting across the river, probably crossing that bridge. You know what? I love to do that, and getting on the Sino, because it's a good gateway to get me east from here. And if you look at a map, you will see that the eastern panhandle of West Virginia is both south and west of my ultimate destination. So I need to generally be going east and north. Well, the Sino is great for going east, so that's, I think, the good way to go. And it doesn't take me very long, probably less than 20 miles or so, until I've got a really good gateway from Maryland up north and making a real hard cut up north. And that is in Williamsport, Maryland. In Williamsport, and by the way, don't confuse it with Williamsport, New York, which is the Little League Hall of Fame thing. Anyways, this is Williamsport, Maryland. From there, trying to connect north from that part of Maryland into Pennsylvania is a really, really good idea, because Pennsylvania, and this gets into my past research, has some really surprisingly robust official Commonwealth bike routes. And I've got a link in the show notes to those. They crisscross the state. They follow some relatively major roads. They include use of local infrastructure, including bike trails. Really quite well done. They're also very well signed on the roads. When I drive from here to Western New York, where my folks live, along US Highway 15 is one of the main north-south routes. And every time I go on, I think it's Route J, if memory serves, I'm always thinking, I'm going to have to ride this one of these days. Well, turns out the research I did years ago, I should check and see how old this was. I threw in a lot of the Pennsylvania bike maps, and I saw Route S. Pennsylvania Bike Route S, and we're going to get to that in a little bit. So the key there is, now that's going to be a linkage. It goes across the entire width of Pennsylvania on the southern side. So getting up to Pennsylvania Route S is a huge key to being able to make all of this happen. So how do I get there from Williamsport to Route S? It's not right there. I have to get north from there. This is where I have another good tip for you. Not always, but have I mentioned that U.S. highways are great for bike touring? Now, not always, but I'm going to say that now when U.S. highways, these are the ones, not interstates. The interstates are the ones with the blue shields and the red stripe on top. Now, those are the biggest highways we have in the States. But we also have United States highways. They are delineated by white shields with black letters. United States highway. So it'll be US Highway 101, for instance. That makes up the bulk of the riding for the Pacific Coast route in Oregon and California. Indeed, also a lot of the Washington side as well. It has, not everywhere, but in a lot of places, good to great shoulders for many parts of the ride. Turns out in Williamsport, Maryland, you have an excellent gateway northbound, and that is US Highway 11. I did some, and this is where Google Maps and Street View is a really helpful tool for you. Taking a look at the Street View, you can determine how good shoulders are and how crowded roads are, because I'm going to be going through several relatively crowded areas, including Hagerstown, which is the biggest city in this entire region. And, well, I shouldn't say region, in the kind of micro region around here. Of course, Baltimore and Washington are bigger cities. In any event, Highway 11, US Highway 11 has a great shoulder through all of this, through the rural areas, which is important, but also through the cities as well. And that is fantastic. So grabbing US Highway 11 as the gateway northbound to hook up to the city of Chambersburg, Pennsylvania. That's where you intersect with US Highway 30, which goes eastbound all the way basically to Philadelphia, but more importantly at the same time, Pennsylvania Bike Route S. That gets me all the way to Philadelphia over the course of a couple of days. That is huge right there. And there's two things that I can take away from that. Highway 30 runs parallel, or is in fact Pennsylvania Bike Route S, but it does deviate from there for a little while. So there's a couple of options when I get deeper into my research here. Does it make more sense to continue on US Highway 30 or to deviate and go on Pennsylvania Bike Route S? That's probably going to be a function of infrastructure, going to be a function of where it goes. What do I want to do? What's the terrain? Things along those lines. But that's beautiful because that gives me at least a couple of different opportunities there. My best guess is that the bike route deviates for a reason. So it's something to take a look at down the line. And I would probably end up using Google Maps Street View and maybe even taking a look at some of the ride with GPS options that are out there, searching other people's routes to see if that has been done before. So just things like that. And that's for deeper research down the way. But here's the thing. Now we get into the light bulb moment. And once I get myself on a bike route to Philadelphia, I'm realizing this is probably going to be a lot easier from here because connecting a small town in West Virginia to New York City probably hasn't been done too many times before. But connecting Philadelphia to New York by bike has been done a lot of times. And that's when we get to another piece of prior research that I looked at. I thought about going on the East Coast Greenway for a really long time. I thought about using the East Coast Greenway as a full bike tour of the Atlantic coast for, well, a long time, like I said. But I've always been a little bit, I don't know what the phrase I want to say is. I've been reluctant to try it because, again, the East Coast Greenway goes through some parts of cities where it's just the infrastructure is not all that great, or at least wasn't all that great. I'm keeping my eye on it because it is something that I would like to consider doing as a full Atlantic Coast component someday down the line. Just the East Coast is just a lot harder to deal with than the West Coast overall. I've been meaning to hit a piece of the East Coast Greenway for years. So the fact that I'm sitting there in Philadelphia, hypothetically, and the East Coast Greenway goes right through there and connects it directly with New York City, that's when I started looking into it a little bit more. The gap between the end of Pennsylvania Bike Route S and the Greenway is pretty minimal, and that gets me onto a trail on the New Jersey side of the river, and I'm on my way. I'm going through Trenton and then north to New Brunswick, and then I cut across the center of the state before turning north again to Elizabeth. By the way, if you know New Jersey, these cities may mean something to you. If not, well, the more cities I name, the closer I'm getting to New York. Going through Elizabeth, then through Newark, and then Jersey City. And then from there, it's a quick ferry or it's a PATH train to Manhattan. It's not real easy to get from that area by bike to Manhattan. It's super easy to use transit, so I probably would use transit to do that last bit of connection right there. So that's it. And that's literally how fast it can go. When you are starting from a sense of, I want to go here and I want to start here, utilizing all the various resources that I have available to me, it's sort of like putting together a puzzle. And the momentum, once you get a bunch of the pieces together, starts to get faster and faster as you have fewer pieces left and fewer gaps to fill that in. It literally went that fast once I kind of got hooked up. When I made the connection between the C&O and Pennsylvania Bike Route S, that's when I really went off to the races. And then I had a fairly decent bike route all pulled together. So then my next step is, okay, I've figured out how this could hypothetically work. What's my mileage? What's my timing? And that's the next step that I can use to determine whether there's camping possibilities or I'd have to look at hotels or Airbnbs. That's going to be where the real details come in. And I haven't gotten to that point yet, because I'm not sure for a variety of reasons whether or not this is going to be possible in the early part of the year next year, but it's going to be the next step that would be happening there. I will say, just sort of eyeballing the route, I think that the early parts of the tour look like that there would be potentially some camping, if not some wild camping. I have no idea if there are any state parks, local parks, anything along those lines that would be in that possibility. But, you know, it would be the next step of things. Later in the ride. I think things get a lot trickier. I think between Philadelphia and New York City, while there are going to be some rural parts of New Jersey, it's much more urban in a lot of those areas, and urban areas are just harder to pull off camping. It's possible. You can do it. I remember Kimberly and I did a big RV tour that was related to a book that she had written, doing basically a big book tour. We actually did I think we did a full week, literally in Jersey City. Like, you could see, I think you could see both the Manhattan skyline, you could see the Statue of Liberty from where our RV was. So there are camping opportunities in strange spots. I'm not sure if there's tent camping, but you never know what's possibility there. Generally, just again, eyeballing this based on mileage, based on kind of natural places where I would think about calling it a day. I figured that this is about a 6-day ride. This would be from here, would be going to Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, reasonable distance. Then from Chambersburg to York, Pennsylvania. Then about from there, I don't know where the stop would be, but it would be a 2-day ride between York and Trenton, which Trenton, of course, is on the other side from Philadelphia. And then 2 days from Trenton across and up New Jersey into New York City. So it's a very reasonable trip, and actually could be a lot of fun when all is said and done. And what a big diverse array of places that it would include. The terrain is perhaps the biggest question mark. I think it's a bit of a mixed bag. I think that there are parts of Pennsylvania where it would be a lot of up and down parts, and those tends to be the type of terrain I like the least. But I think it would be worth it to be able to pull off a trip like this. So I think that that's a really interesting thing. Again, something that I would look more into on an app like Ride with GPS, or something else that gives me a sense of what it looks like. I think I'll also look to see if there are some crazy guy in a bike journals, because those can be really helpful as well when you look at the daily entries, because people will be pretty clear if it's a kind of like it's a pretty flat day today, or oh my god, there were 1,000 hills and they were all straight up and straight down. I think that's good information to have when you're prepping. It appears that there are good shoulders when you're on the roads. There's also some trails that will be involved, and brand new trails to me as a piece of this. And I think that would be one of the more exciting aspects to all of this. When it comes to the equipment, this is also about the stage when I get a better sense of knowing what equipment I would be bringing. And I would say that, let me start with a bike. I think that I would lean pretty heavily, if not almost assuredly, bring the full-size touring bike, my Navara Safari. But I will say the Brompton isn't completely out of the question. I mean, I've certainly ridden the Brompton in similar terrain that I think that I'd be going through, but I think that is the type of bike that if I'm going to need to bring heavier camping equipment, or if I'm going to be relying much more on camping over the course of 6 days, that's an awful long time to carry a very minimal setup with me. I think it would depend on the nature of how I break things down. If it turns out that it would be more hotels or Airbnbs than camping, maybe I would consider the Brompton. But that again would only matter so much if it was difficult for me to get the bike back, and having the Brompton would be a necessary thing about coming back. And I'll talk about that in a moment. Camping and lodging, because that's the next thing that determines what I bring. Because if I'm camping, I'm bringing a whole different set of gear. If I'm doing all kind of roofs over my head, that really lightens my load. And that, of course, might inform the bike as well. And the answer to this is, I'm not sure. That's going to be in the next steps, but I do suspect that I would like to do at least some camping for all of this, which means, it's kind of a mixed bag, which means that the efficiency of carrying all that gear isn't necessarily great, especially in the latter parts of it. But I suspect that there might be some stealth camping that could be involved, and that's pretty compelling. I've been finding myself more and more drawn to that over time, not just because it's free. It's just, I think it adds to the adventure. So that would be something else, another thing, another blank to be filled in down the line. Big ticket question here. Is this a COVID-friendly tour? And I think I have to be honest, I'm just not sure. I'd probably have to consider, as I mentioned, hotels, Airbnbs, things along those lines. Now, it's not that I haven't done Airbnbs even this year. I think it's really going to depend on what's going on when I do decide to do this. worst case scenario here, this would be probably a great tour for post-vaccination, but probably too early to consider flying time zone. And that, who knows? I mean, as we sit here, I've been seeing all sorts of different things about vaccinations for somebody in my position. It could be next spring of 2021, could be as late as the summer or maybe even the fall. So that's going to be a real question mark when all is said and done. So I think that I'm going to tread into this pretty carefully, not unlike how when I mentioned the Florida tour a few episodes ago, I pretty much dispensed with that. That was kind of a pie in the sky thing, as I had mentioned at the time, because I was like, geez, I just don't know what the numbers are going to be like. And well, as it turns out, the numbers suck. So we're not going to be going to Florida in the winter. So I'm going to have to say, let's dog ear this one. I think that there's probably a way for me to feel comfortable doing a ride like this. I wouldn't be able to do it in kind of as contact free as I've been doing my tours on the C&O, but that might not be as necessary depending on the timing of all of this and depending on what's going on around and how vaccination's going, how everything. So is this COVID friendly? To be determined. I don't think I would have felt comfortable doing this tour this year, but maybe next year, depending on conditions. So dog ear it, we'll see. All right, fast forward a bit here. Let's pretend I'm in Manhattan. How the heck do I get back? Well, of course, there's a variety of different options. And again, COVID is going to impact all of these things. Certainly Amtrak is an option. Amtrak is interesting, though, because the Northeast Corridor does not have roll-on bike service. So if I was going to come back to, there's no way around it. I'd have to go down to DC and then take the Capital Limited from DC back over to Martinsburg and be able to make that happen. So the train is tricky. I'd have to box the bike up. But as many of you know, when you box your bike up, on Amtrak, and you buy their box, I think it's like $10 or $15. It's worth it because it's friggin' enormous. All you basically have to do is take off your pedals and you can literally just take off your pedals and take off your handlebars. Typically I do, which is super easy and super fast. And then essentially you can just roll your bike right into the box. Really simple, really easy. It's an option, not great, but it's certainly there. I could do a one-way car rental. There are buses. There's all sorts of different opportunities that are there. The trick is, of course, getting the bike back. And so that's the biggest question mark there. Some of them are better than others from a COVID perspective. So I think that this is something that I would end up having to make a decision later on. And what's going on with the virus is certainly going to be a part of all of this. So that would get me back home. So am I doing this? I wouldn't be doing this podcast if I wasn't pretty interested. I think you could probably figure that out by now. I've also always wanted to circumnavigate Manhattan as a day tour. And I think I've talked about that on the podcast in the past. So if timing allows, this is only a 6-day ride. It looks like, I think if I was able to get lodging in either New Jersey or New York, then I could get up the next morning and do a circumnav of Manhattan and then come back. I think that would be a kind of really interesting, exclamation point on a tour like this. So that's another possibility as an add-on. Am I going to do it? This is definitely we're past the half-baked point on this. This is 3/4 baked. This could be definitely something that I could pull off. This would definitely be better in the cooler months. So this would be an early tour, I think, or a late tour sometime next year. So depending on how things go, this might be a fall type of a tour, but we're, again, going to have to kind of see how things end up going. But I really like this tour. This is the first time that I've ever gotten this far in my research where it's been worth talking to you all about. In terms of an East Coast tour. Really, on the East Coast, the only routing I've done is in Florida and on the C&O, and obviously the Gap as well. But, nothing really in this on the coastal areas. And, although this isn't really coastal, at least it's getting me there. And I don't know, I'm pretty interested in this as a possibility for 2021, which is why I decided to basically give an entire episode around all of this. I also wanted to, since I'm kind of unpacking some of the tours that I have been talking about, I thought it would be worth giving a quick mention of the other tour that I talked about, and that was my best of Portland to San Francisco ride, and just giving a little bit of insight on this before we kind of wrap things up in this episode. And that is just talking a little bit about where I'm at from a planning perspective on that. Again, more insight in how I build these types of things. This one was a little bit easier because I've done so much research on buses on the Oregon coast and into Northern California and how that interfaces with the best parts of the ride. I had a really interesting way of figuring out that I've got essentially taking what's a 14 to 15 day ride and knocking it down to 7 days. And, what it does is it leans on the parts of the Pacific Coast that I really, really like and parts of the ride that I really like, and then finding where there's good opportunities for fast forwards. I'm here to tell you, I consider the entire ride a best of, and fast forwarding through some parts of this would actually be quite a bummer. I'm looking at it right now, the part that is the biggest bummer is that I would miss out on the Seven Devils if I did it this way. And the Seven Devils, of course, is the part of the Oregon coast. It's just north of Bandon, and it is so fun and so cool. But the thing that's a bummer is that it starts the morning of in one of my least favorite of all of the state parks, Sunset Bay. And it's only because the infrastructure there is just not so great for the hiker-biker compared to other ones that are out there. So that one ends up being a trade-off as I'm kind of looking at this. And I'm not going to go into the particulars of all of this. But just suffice to say, I saw that there was a... There was a point in this where I was like, do I want to skip certain parts of the California ride? And I'm like, no, I really want to make sure that I stay in Elk Prairie, for instance. So I had it so that the timing of it ended up working out really well. That ended up taking a bus to Brookings, Oregon, and then riding from there to Elk Prairie, which I've never actually done before. That's typically what ends up happening is that I roll through Brookings, Oregon at the end of a day, and it's my longest day of the entire ride in my kind of classic 14-day version of this. And I get to essentially Crescent City. And then the next morning I wake up and I spend the rest of the day biking to Elk Prairie. Instead, what I'm doing is I'm shifting things up because I like making sure that I want to camp in Elk Prairie, which if you've been listening to the show for any period of time, I spent Canadian Thanksgiving there, I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago. And that is a great special memory. It's a really cool place. And so it's nice to be there. So I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. Maybe mixing things up allows me to still stay there, but in a way that's been different before. So I am going to be ending a day in Elk Prairie, but it's actually after I start off in, looks like North Bend. Tugman State Park, and then riding to North Bend, grabbing a bus, going to Brookings, and I'm still there early enough in the day that I can continue riding all the way to Elk Prairie from there. And some beautiful climbs going through the redwoods. It's going to be a heck of a day, but it's crazy that I'd be starting well up in Oregon, but ending up in Elk Prairie that day. That's just kind of stuff that when you do this kind of planning, and if you're familiar with a route enough, and you've got enough insight as to what the bus availabilities are and how that all works, and since I've tested this out before, that's the kind of thing that's in the realm of possible there. So I'm going to share much more about this best of Portland to San Francisco ride when it becomes more of a reality. This is one, if we're overlaying COVID 2021 on this can't happen until after travel to the West Coast by plane is a reality. And that's just not going to be happening anytime on the early side of things. Maybe sometime late next year, who knows? We'll just have to see. But this one's in my pocket because what I like about this is that it would allow me to enjoy a visit on both sides with friends and family, and also get to do essentially the whole ride just with a bunch of fast forwards in there, which, as we all know, is #not cheating. Thank you for joining. You can find Pedalshift at pedalshift.net for more great bicycle touring content. You can hear the Pedalshift project through Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast app. Opening music courtesy of Jason Kent off his self-titled album. The track is called America. Check out his band Sunfield's latest release, Mono Mono, wherever cool music is available.